try to understand the nature of moral philosophy. Many times moral philosophy is considered as synonymous with ethics. What does moral philosophy really do? Moral philosophy is a philosophical thinking about morality, about moral problems, it also involves the analysis of moral judgments. So, moral philosophy arises when we pass beyond the stage in which we are directed by certain traditional rules and we achieve a kind of autonomy as moral agents. Now, we can distinguish between three kinds of thinking that relate to morality in one way or the other. We have first the descriptive or empirical inquiry. Or it could be also historical, it could be scientific, such as those inquiries and investigations which are done by anthropologists, by historians, by psychologists, by sociologists. Here the aim or the goal is basically to describe or explain the phenomena of morality or to work out a theory of human nature which has its bearing on ethical questions. So, we have this one type of inquiry which is just descriptive and empirical. Then there is the normative thinking. In this case, here one would ask what is right, what is good, what is obligatory, and we make certain normative judgments. For example, I ought not to tell lies, or knowledge is good, honesty is good. It is wrong to cause harm to another person or to hurt someone. So, what we are basically giving is, we try also to give certain reasons for these judgments. We try to ask certain principles, certain rules, and then make these normative judgments. There is a third kind which is called as analytical or critical thinking. It is also called sometimes as meta-ethical thinking. Now, there are many recent moral philosophies which limit moral philosophy to thinking of the third kind, to thinking which is meta-ethical, and excluding it from the questions of psychology and empirical science, and also normative questions about what is good and right. However, we shall take the traditional point of view, we shall consider ethics to include meta-ethics, but to also include normative ethics. So, ethics would therefore have two dimensions: meta-ethics and normative ethics. Both these would be included in ethics. So, it would also include normative ethics, which we deal with questions about what is good or right, and which deals also about how to solve certain problems which arise in the context of behavior which is right or good, bad or wrong. Morality is sometimes defined as the instrument of society. It is also defined as an instrument of society. As if an individual or a family or a social class cannot have a morality, or they cannot have a moral action guide of their own, which is different from that of the society as a whole. There are certain smaller groups, or there are even certain individuals who may or may not have certain distinct guides of conduct. And yet, we call these as certain value systems, moralities, or moral codes. And those which we refer to from a moral point of view. Even if we insist that there are individuals who have certain personal morality, they must be thinking that others besides themselves, or an individual must be thinking that others beside himself, indeed the entire society, should adopt, or at least there should be certain of these basic principles or ideas which should be followed by them as well. So, considered as a social system of regulation, morality is like the law on the one hand, and it is also a social etiquette on the other. Or it is a convention. It could also be considered as a convention. Morality therefore fosters, or it even calls us to use reason. Reason is something, and it also calls for certain kind of autonomy. So, there is reason and there is also autonomy. On the part of the individual, asking him when he is mature and when he is normal to make his own decisions, probably maybe taking advice from his other members, and even stimulating him to think out of the about the principles or goals in the light of which he can make his decisions. So, therefore, there is reason involved, and there is also the autonomy of the individual which is involved as far as moral decisions, moral behavior itself is concerned. Even as a social institution of life, morality is therefore aimed at rational self-guidance, or self-determination of its members. Now, therefore, moral philosophers distinguish between stages of morality, which could be traced in the history and the culture as well as in the life of the individual. For instance, we have first the pre-rational, or customary or group morality. And then we have the personal or rational morality. This is pre-rational or group morality. This second one is the personal or the rational morality, or it could also be considered as reflective morality. Therefore, morality starts as a set of culturally defined goals and the rules governing the achievement of these goals. So, there are certain goals and we have certain rules to achieve these goals. And these rules are more or less external to the individual, or rather they are imposed on him or they are inculcated as habits. These goals and rules therefore get internalized, they get interiorized, and the individual begins to take them as his own. He regulates his conduct with the help of these rules and regulations. He develops a conscience, a superego. Now, this process of internalization sometimes could be quite irrational, but it is a typical for morality to accompany its inculcations with some sort of reason giving. There is always this concept of reason giving which is involved in the case of moral decisions. And thus we give reasons to a child, for example, when he tries to attain the age at which he can understand, at the age in which he can exercise his own free will. And we feel and we ask him or we make him aware that he could be asking reasons when he is told to do certain things. For example, you tell a child that he is not supposed to insult elders, or you tell a child that robbing or stealing is bad. The child has and is always capable of asking reason why. Why should I not steal? Why should I not tell lies? So this reason process or the reasoning or the asking for reason is a part and parcel of this process of inculcating even values or inculcating certain moral behavior, maybe in the child or in other members as well. Now, the institution of morality therefore consists of a number of factors. First, there are certain forms of judgment. There are certain forms of judgment in which there are certain particular objects which are said to have or not to have certain moral qualities or obligations or responsibilities. Then the second is the implication of giving reasons for certain judgments which are made. Third is some sort of rules, principles, obligations these are expressed in more general judgments and that form the background in which certain particular judgments are made and there are reasons which are given for them. So, you have certain particular judgments which are based maybe on more general judgments. Then there is a certain characteristic, natural feeling. There's a certain natural or a certain type of acquired ways of feeling that accompany these judgments. Rules and ideals which help us to move to act in accordance with them, by which we try to act according to these rules and principles itself. Then there are also certain sanctions. So we have certain sanctions or we have additional sources of motivation that are always expressed or often expressed in verbal judgments. Like for example, we blame somebody, we praise somebody, or we hold somebody as responsible. And then finally, there is a point of view which is taken. There is a particular point of view that is taken in making all judgments, that is taken while we make certain reasoning, when there is certain feeling, and is somehow different from those which are taken in prudence, in art and the like. So, there are therefore these 6 aspects or these 6 factors which are involved in the institution of morality. Now, moral or ethical judgments are of various kinds. They could be either particular moral judgments, could be either particular or general. So, there could be either particular judgments or there could be general judgments. There are not only these moral judgments, there are certain non-moral judgments as well. So, we also have certain non-moral judgments. We have certain non-moral judgments as well. Like for example, we speak of past judgments, say on books. We speak about paintings. We may speak about certain system of education. We may speak about certain form of architecture, where we also make certain judgments about them. I read a book and I make a judgment, say, oh, this is a good book. Or I go say for a movie. I see the movie and after seeing the movie, I say, oh, that movie was not good. It was a bad movie. So, we make certain judgments also which are based not on human action directly, but based on things or objects which are not human. So, therefore, we have certain non-moral judgments also which are therefore passed. Now, there are various kinds of judgments. The first kind of judgment is the ethical or moral judgments proper. Ethical or moral judgments. In this, we have the judgments of moral obligation. We have judgments of moral obligation. And these moral obligation judgments could be either particular for example, I can say, I not ought to harm him, or he has done a wrong action. And you could also have general. Like for example, we ought to keep our promises. Or I can say, all men or everyone has the right to speech or the right to freedom. Okay, so these are particular and general. Then we have judgments of moral value. We have first ethical and moral judgments, which are subdivided into judgments of moral obligation. These are subdivided into particular and general. Then we have judgments of moral value. These again are subdivided into particular. For example, so you have judgments of moral value again, which can be particular. For example, I can say, my teacher was a good person. Or I can also say, the motive of my friend was good. And I have certain general also judgments. For example, I can say, kindness is a virtue, or stealing is bad. Okay, so these are one category of judgments which are there, which are the moral judgments. The second category is the non-moral normative judgments. We have non-moral normative judgments. In this again, we have judgments of non-moral values. Judgments of non-moral values, which again are subdivided into particular. For example, I can say that is a good computer, or this is a good book. And then I have another one subcategory, which is general. For example, I say dishonesty is bad, or I can say democracy is the best form of government, for example. And then I have judgments of non-moral obligation. These again are particular. When I say, for example, you ought to buy a computer to say do your postgraduate studies. Or I say, for example, you ought to go for the party. Okay, and then we have the general. For example, when I say, suppose let's say you are solving a logic problem, or we are doing an exercise in logical reasoning, and I say, while solving these particular problems, you ought to refer to the rules of logic. So what I am trying to make is general judgments, but these are of a non-moral obligation. Now, moral philosophy also, when I was speaking about ethics in the same manner, moral philosophy also has a practical purpose. And therefore, moral philosophy is not conceived as purely theoretical knowledge of moral phenomena, but of a practical knowledge of how we ought to live. It is practical knowledge of how we ought to live. The goal, therefore, is not that we should simply know what goodness is, but what we should do to become good. However, this is not exactly what characterizes moral philosophy, because novelists, poets, dramatists, even historians, they have also functioned in one way or the other, and they also claim to give us some knowledge about good and evil. So, if you take, for example, various philosophers, right from say Kant, Sidgwick, Henry Sidgwick, or there are other thinkers also, who state that it is not the philosopher's aim to discover new truths. Moral philosophy, they say, should give a systematic account of the knowledge which man already possesses. So, therefore, moral philosophy, if you really see, it is basically concerned with giving us certain rules and regulations or knowledge or norms and standards of how we should live in a society, how we as human beings who are part of the society should behave. That is what moral philosophy really deals with. And I said right in the beginning, moral philosophy many times is considered as synonymous to ethics itself.